Guys, I'm Liesel. I'm going to show you step by step how to do the Monet's Water Lilies. And I just want you to make sure that you have your paint palette with blue, primary blue, phthalo blue is good, yellow and red, primary red, and then black and white, so we mix everything together. And also a few brushes, so a large and some sort of medium and detailed brush. The ones that I use are these ones. So these are flat squares that I use a lot of, and then a detailed brush for the finer details of the painting. Water cup and paper towel, of course. If you have premixed colors, that's great, but I'm going to show you how to mix everything to get all the different and wonderful colors in the painting. It's very impressionist style, so it's a lot of textured paint and mixing of different colors instead of all one color. We want to have lots and lots of greens and some browns in there to break up all of that green. So what I start with is my very large brush, and I just dip it in my water, and I'm just going to start with mixing some green, which is, your yellow, and a little dip of blue. So now you see you have green, mostly yellow to get a basic green like this, some white. So you have one green to start. This is kind of like a lighter green, and then I'm going to, you don't have to wash off your brush, I'm just going to take some more blue, pull it to the side, so making a different green, yellow, 2 scoops of yellow, and then you'll have a just more darker green. Now I'm going to wash off my brush and make more of like a lighter lime green, which is white, yellow, and a little touch of blue. Mostly yellow, white, so you get it super light. So I'm going to be using kind of this couple colors to start with. And I'm just going to wash off my brush and start with a bit of a darker green. So I'm going to start with that dark green for my willow tree. And I do like to also get a little bit of an outline, so pretty high up here. And very narrow down to pretty wide out. Something like that. So it looks like it's far away and there's like a little tiny nook going between the willow tree and the other side of the forest, and then it widens out quite a bit onto the side. So I'm going to use this green to start my willow tree. And my willow tree is going to go about halfway across, so right in between here. You can go a little bit further ahead, and then just go up and down, get a nice base coat. Up and down to start with the little willow tree. You can turn your brush on the thin side to get streaky lines, like feathery. We're going to be building on this, so I'm just going to keep going, get a base coat. I like the layers that this has on it. After we do this color, I go back and we're going to layer on a lot of different greens and some browns to make it look more like you can see the different branches and leaves come down to create all those layers. Okay, so that's a good start. And what I do is I actually just keep using the same green to get onto this side. And I kind of make like dabs, spongy dabs and commas to start this foliage, very leafy forest side of the garden. You can do little commas like this. You can use the same big brush, you can use something smaller. It's just a base coat, so you don't have to worry too much, but starting with like a spongy look and dabbing like this, it creates more texture than going up and down. I like to do the dabs and the little commas. You can go backwards, you know, and just do bigger ones, little ones, different types of things, because it's going to add to the overall look. I'm going to go pretty close to the bottom. Start filling it up a bit more. And I want it to be mostly darker right here into the middle, so you can get a lot in there. Just start dabbing, filling a lot of the space up. Try not to have too many white spaces in between, because you have to fill it at some point. Just keep them clumped together. You can leave some white spaces, of course, because we're going to fill it in, but just get a lot of it filled. Okay, so that's a good start. Wash off the brush. And now what we want to do is go into our willow tree again. I'm going to be adding a bit of black. Just plain black on my brush. Washed it off, taking some black, a little dip of water. And I will actually streak some of this black in. See, I'm just kind of feathering it. It's hard to see against the dark green already. But it's going to create some nice contrast and depth already into your painting. Coming from the top too. Mostly the bottom, I want it to be mostly shadowed around here. And you can actually fill in this gap here between the willow tree and the other side of the garden with some more shadow. So this is just black over top of your wet green, and I'm just gonna dab this in, put some commas into some spots that's already kind of dark green, so it makes more of a deeper shadow. And it'll make the lighter highlights of the leaves pop out even more. So just give that a minute and we will start on lighter greens. You'll see a big difference. Lighter greens, I'm actually going to switch to my medium flat brush. So that was just a smaller version of the big one. And I'm going to now make some lighter greens, which I think I've already showed you and mixed together. So if you still have it, great. Otherwise, you could just play around and mix some lighter greens. It's just a little bit of blue, yellow, and then a scoop of white to make it much brighter. I like the drastic changes in color so that you can see all the different greens and they're not too similar in color. Trust me, you need to make drastic changes in order for it to pop out, especially when you look at it from a distance. So I'm just going to start from the top and start dragging it down a bit. Still a bit wet, which is fine. It just it's going to be much harder to see, as you can tell here. I'm going to have to just go a little bit lighter, add some more white. But I don't blend it in with my green. I like to just let it sit. Some on the bottom. So I'm just going to add this in. You can always go back and add some more dark green or black in if you just covered it all up. You can play around with this. There's lots and lots of layers you can put in. Also, this is something I add over on the other side, this forest area. So I just take more green, that light green, and just dab it or do some commas I like to dab a little bit less over towards the dark section and then do some bigger, clumpier, more of like the bigger commas over on this side so it looks like it's closer to you. You can already see a lot more going on in the background. Just going to fill up all these spaces here. You don't want any white showing unless you actually put white there and you want it to be white. Little ones here. Now what I add is, with my square brush, I'm going to be making a little bit of a brown, which breaks up the color and adds a bit more earthy tones into the painting. So I'm going to take my red with some yellow, start off with some orange, and then when you mix a little bit of blue, you get just a little touch of blue, you get more of a brown, but I like to add more red. So I'm just going to take more red, and you'll see that it actually looks more like a mahogany red, almost a bronze. If you add a little bit of white, it makes it a bit lighter. Looks like a brown, just a bit more red. So it's mostly red. And you can, if you don't like it too red, you just add more yellow. A little bit of white, as you saw, it just brightens it up a little. And I'm just going to streak some of this in. Kind of clump it a bit in some spots throughout the willow tree. Put some in here in the background. A little extra bit of warm colors in nature. It's nice to add in a couple smaller ones back here. I'm gonna make it look like it's like wrapping around the bend here. And some down here. Just throughout, you can add this in. I like to go mostly on the bottom. And some here around the top and sides. So that's just a bit of brown added, and I also take this brown, red, bronze looking color and just put some in here as well into the foliage on the other side. So you'll just do the same technique, little clumps and commas. I like to just let my brush go, just dab, 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 and add this color in. It breaks up all that color. Nice little added color. Some maybe over here. I like to go in the darker sections. So you can see all that little bits of brown, but it's not so noticeable because it goes with like all the dark colors. So add as much as you like. And then I just wash off this brush. You can always add more later too, but you don't need to go overboard. After I wash off this brush, I like to take just plain blue, your phthalo blue, your primary blue. It's nice, just all by itself, and streak in plain blue in your willow tree. Just let it sit there, don't blend it in. And some little streaks over here towards the side to make it look like it's going around the bend a bit more. It's wrapped around. There we go. Some blue added in. Before we add highlights, just let it dry on that side for a bit. And I like to go back and forth to things. I like to go back into here and add some just different greens before I do my highlights. So one green that I do like to add is, if you have, you know, this green that we were using before, I like to just mix over the same stuff, adding a bit of brown to it to make it more diluted and not as vibrant green, just a bit more softer. So more muted colors, more yellow and blue, just so that it's not too light, because I'm not going to highlight it right now, but I'm just going to add in some of that brown, or even just taking a bit of black can be good. See how it's very gray? Test it out. Just very, just softens everything up. Just gonna dab, do some commas as well. It kind of blends a bit more too, if you want things to be a bit more blended and not as choppy and mixed more together a little. So it's like a bit more of a gray, but you don't have to do this if you don't want to add this more muted color, although I think it's a nice soft color to add in. So if you covered up a lot of your darkness in the background, you can actually just take your dark green or some black and add it back into wherever it's already darkest, usually by the darker greens, maybe around the browns. Just add some back in. Lots of texture and color, different colors, different greens. So I'm just washing this off, and again, just waiting for things to dry. I like to switch back to my large brush. Get going on the water. So the water is mostly another muted color. It's like a shale blue kind of color, a bit of gray with some blue. So I'm going to pull some blue to the side, white. You can add a touch of yellow if you want it to be more teal. You know, it's all about preference. More white, I like it to be a bit lighter. And I'm going to take a little bit of black. So I'm trying to take some black here, and you'll see it turns very gray blue. If it's too gray, you know, test it out, see if you like it. If it's too gray, just add more blue, add more white. I'm actually going to use a bit of this gray. It looks very gray. I don't mind using a little bit, especially on the edges where it's a bit darker. I don't have enough white in here, so I think I'm just going to put some on the sides. Different colors are great. Wash this off. I didn't put too much. And then take a little just a little scoop of that. I'm going to start on a new palette so that I'm not mixing with the same colors or with the greens. And I'm just going to make a bit more blue with it. See how it's a bit more blue now and less of a gray color. But see, now it's got a hint of gray or white. Much brighter. So this is actually, it's good to have different colors. So you can see with this, I'm just going to go right in the middle, make it a bit brighter. Go in the middle and let it blend with that gray. With the very blue gray. See how it makes it a bit more blue too when you mix it, it spreads it around. And when it's dry, you can always go back over it and just make it more blue or a different color, but it has to dry. This is just mostly blending it together, dragging the gray around too with the blue, and just going to go to the bottom. So at the bottom, since it's a bit open here, as I go to the bottom, I make it a bit more shadowed. So that's just taking another dip of blue with that light gray blue that I had, just to make it a bit darker, maybe a touch more black. Touch more black. Try not to take too much, otherwise it'll be very gray as you saw before. See, it's a bit darker now. Just go along the bottom. If you like the color, just stick with it. Otherwise you can adjust it. It's very forgiving. And you can see as I merge these two together, I'm going to start dragging it up, because I'm starting at the bottom using a lot of my paint. And I'm going to drag it up to this kind of other gray blue that I had. Blend it together, just go right into it and it blends. So it's a bit more blended. Now, I'm going to just darken up the edges too. So I'm going to take more of that blue. And I'm not going to mix it with too much of this. I don't want it to get too light with a little bit of more of the black, so it gets just a little bit darker blue. Blue and a touch of black is great if you want to start fresh on a new separate pile. So you could just, right there, you can just make another pile. Although, you know, Impressionist style, you don't have to wash off your brush every time. You can just use whatever you already have. And you can see that I'm just going to darken up the edges. The back can be darkened as well because it's kind of going into that little nook of between the two sides of the forest on the side and the willow tree, and darken up the sides here. So it's okay if you go over your willow tree. We're going to go over it. You have to do some layering and bring it down to the side. It's just making more shadow. On the edges, so it creates more shadow where the grass is kind of overlapping and from the forest on the very edge, and then it's more brighter in the middle. Okay. I'm going to keep my lines pretty straight. I like to keep it level with the canvas. It makes it look like more calm waters and it's not all wonky and going in different directions. wash this off. And then after that, when you're happy with your water, just let it dry. If you want to brighten up in the middle more, you can with some more light blue. But we're going to come back to this a little bit later. I just darkened up another little layer of the same dark blue, just a bit on the edges until I guess I was happy with it. And if you want to, like I said, lighten it up, I'm still waiting for it to dry. If you want to add some lighter blues in the center. So I'm just washing this brush off, and then I'm going to be adding some lighter greens and highlights into the willow tree. So I'm just going to grab that same square brush, grab the light green. So a bit of light green and also some light teal. So just a bit, it's just really more blue and white to make it a bit more bluey green looking. And it's also preference. You can try out all the colors. A bit more blue. I like the kind of teal look. It's nice. Little lines over here, and then do some longer ones. You can start overlapping your water a bit too. Whenever, because the sides, you should be happy with the sides and the edges. You don't want to keep going over back and forth. So just doing some feathering right over the edge. And in the top part, so it has a nice teal look, and if you can change it up, you don't have to do teal, you can actually just do some, you can do both, you can do this light green, remember that one, and add it in, cover some of it up, streak it in. Lots of different colors is what I did. So we're about to put the very, very light highlight. So that is something I do, of course, afterwards. Whenever you're done and happy with the amount of colors you put in and the shadowing, you can go back and put some black in. If you don't see it anymore, nice to add a couple pieces of black for extra shadow, maybe along the bottom too. And also some brown if you need to add brown again. The red brown, I like the red brown. And now I'm washing off my brush after I've finished up with that willow tree. We just have to do some more highlights on the other side, the forest, and then go back to the willow tree to add those nice highlights with some bright yellow, maybe a little bit of lime green, mostly bright yellow. And this bright yellow is, of course, yellow and white, lots of white. Not too much yellow because it's going to make it really highlighted looking. You can add a touch of blue, that's why it looks a bit like on the lime side. But you know, it's all about preference. You can just do yellow and white. I like to just mix whatever is available. So I'm going to start, I said I would start on this side, so let's do that. I'm going to just start dabbing. You can see I'm going to just use my brush straight on, get little ones over here so it looks like it's further away, and then just start pressing a little bit harder on the edges here where it's kind of outside of that shadowed part. I think a lot of the lightness would be mostly away from the shadowed area. So I'm going to try to highlight more of where the lighter greens are and not directly over top of like the dark greens and browns and black. So this is mostly just dabbing and smudging. It looks more leafy that way. I like to also break it up. If it's too much, you can just go back to some of your lighter green and blend it a bit more. Just dab a little bit around it, soften it up a little. This is just that lighter green again, softening up very bright yellow. Basically until you're happy with it. So you still see some of the shadowing in between from underneath it because you didn't do every single spot. You just left it a little bit more sporadic, but still clumped together a bit. Now also, I like to take just a dark green that with the black, so it's pretty much just looks like black, and I like to pretty much dab around here to make it look like there's some shadowed bits if you need to define it more around that area. Then wash off your brush, and we're going to do our highlights on the other side. So same light yellow or lime green, super bright, lots of white basically. Start from the top, just kind of flick it down using the thin side of your brush, little tiny ones over here, the little lines, and then you can start pulling down a bit more over here, and then some on the bottom. So you can see that nice bright highlight popping out. Just going to do a bit more here. Look at all the wonderful colors. It's pretty cool. Wash it off. And if you need to, this is optional, you can just, after you wash it off, take plain white and you can add some in right on top of your bright yellow or lime green on the sides just for an extra pop of white. Some spots don't go crazy because it's white and it's going to make it very bright. Mostly on the side where I said it was a bit lighter, and then you can keep it more darker on that side. Okay. So that is the willow tree and the forest on the other side, the foliage. Any other touch-ups you want to do, now is a good time. I actually don't mind putting a little bit of this bright yellow over here a bit to break up some of that darkness, even though it's shadowed. It just makes it stand out a little bit more. And then we will get back into the water and start making more details in there, just a few more, and then we're gonna make the reeds and the grass on this side. Water, you can add just some light blue, which is some white and blue, light blue. A little dip of that, wipe some of that off, I don't want too much, and just mix it with some of your white. I'm trying not to put it into my green, although just a touch of green is fine. Like I said, it's going to make a bit of a teal color, which is totally fine in water. Kind of reflects all the colors that's happening around. Test it out. You can see there's a little bit of aqua, hint of aqua. Just going to lightly press the same brush that I've been using. You can get little highlights and streaks in the water. Mostly in the middle. Really adds to it, I think. Little highlights, see these streaks. You don't have to worry about them being too thin. If you look up close, it's actually not that thin. It's kind of a thicker line. And put some on the sides, just a little bit. You can have some streaking into some of the dark, just breaks up the color. Maybe a little bit into the dark blue, so you can have little white streaks for highlight. There, now we have like a complex looking water. Just a couple colors. That was mostly the gray is what did it. The gray is what makes it look like it has some softer tones and it's not so blue. It's actually the blue with the gray mixed that made it look like a really soft blue in the painting. So I'm just going to, again, just leave that alone. And now, whenever you're happy with this, you can move on to the reeds and the grass on this side. And you want to make sure that you've touched up your painting enough before we move on to in the water, before we move back into the water and put the lily pads. You don't want to fix your water after you've done the lily pads or as you're doing the lily pads. It's not really ideal because it makes it look very choppy and not as smooth as how we did it when it's open and you can go back and forth with nice long strokes. Okay, so I'm going to just keep using this brush. I find it very useful. I'm going to start with how we've been doing this before. In the grass, I like to do darker green. You can, honestly, you can see my palette. You can mix it anywhere. I like to keep darker colors in the darker sections, lighter colors in the lighter sections. You can just adjust them. Blue, some yellow, and introduce a little dip of their black. Makes it darker with a little bit of white, so it's a bit of a gray green, very toned down. So what I do is you can start with a bit of a line following up the side, that grass line, and then just flick it up. A little bit of water. And now you can see, just start flicking it up, and it's going to be much longer here, right? And then as I get towards the edge, because it's further away, it's going to get smaller and smaller. You can actually switch your brush. If you find that this is not working for you, whatever brush, the bigger one, you can switch to a smaller brush and just do little flicks to make them smaller pieces of grass back here. Change the direction a little of your grass. Make sure you fill this section in. It's all going to be filled in grass. You can just do clumpier strokes to fill it in. Little tiny flicks up at the top. It's going to overlap your foliage, your forest, nice and tall here, and it just gets shorter and shorter. You're going to be able to see this a bit more as soon as we add more colors. It's really easy. So I just wash this brush off. And then I'm going to take a lighter green, much lighter, because it's still wet, so it's going to be maybe just like this teal, blue, white, something like that. Find that very nice. I like wherever I can change up the greens. Adding some teal is always a nice addition, so it's not all just green, it has a bit more blue. You can see it's already breaking up the grass, adding another tone, more depth into it. Now, before we do highlights, we know that we have to wait for it to dry so that we can see it a lot better. But that means we can still add a shadow because black will just cover over top pretty much anything. I'm just going to take plain black on my clean brush and start shadowing the bottom. So you can just go right over top, nice and dark. Do a little bit towards the back, so it's not as much, just like little tiny ones. And then as you get over, you can go much longer. I also like adding a bit of this black, just clump it around the bottom. You can just dab it. Make it a little bit more textured, like there's a little island ending here, so it's not just suddenly into water. Creates more of like an elevated space for the land that it's just like jumping up onto. So I'm just dabbing right over top. Makes it look more textured on the land. And also you can streak some of that out, keep your lines straight and level with the painting for extra shadow. And this dark, this black, you can wipe some of it off and just add some lightly over to the other side if you want to. Just another little added gray tone, but sometimes I do that with my colors. If I have a certain paint color, I just streak some of it in, just add it in, like how we did with the light blue, the aqua blue, just streak it in for an extra little bit of shadow in the water. The highlights on the grass should be a bit more dry. It doesn't have to be completely, it's fine if it blends a little bit with the greens because we're still using the same like colors. And I'm just making that same light yellow, lime green, scoop of white and a dip of yellow on my medium brush after it's been cleaned. And I like to just do little strokes, mostly near the top, So it looks like most of the top is highlighted. Lightly press, get some, maybe a little bit towards the bottom, a little bit, so you can see kind of a little bit of a highlight. See, I'm just tapping and doing little lines too, kind of subtle. Then up here, just going to take more white on my brush. And highlight the tops there. Different directions. Make the grass look a bit more random in the reeds. There we go. Lots of depth, just with a couple colors. Wash this off. And now we can add the lily pads into the water before we make our bridge and the little bit of reeds and grass and some foliage right here covering the side of the bridge. So it looks like the island is kind of overgrown over here, sticking out on the side where the bridge goes onto the other side. Okay, really like this brush. This is a good brush. I think I'm going to stick with it for the lily pads. We're going to be making, it's really repetitive, pretty much different greens again for the lily pads on top of the blue. I'm going to start with just how about a regular green? Because I shadow them a little bit and then I make a bit of a highlight on top. So it's not just, not too bright. I actually add, if you need to start again, you can. You can start with blue and yellow and just make a basic green like that, no white. Or if you're mixing on top of another green, just add more blue and yellow. Don't add any more white to it, just keep it a bit darker. So you can see from this one to this one, it's just darker. I didn't add any black. I'm going to save the black for the shadow. So what you want to do, you can switch to a smaller brush for the smaller ones, or if you need to in general, you can do that. I'm going to start down here and just see, I'm just pressing hard with my brush using the flat side to get pretty much bigger lily pads. And you can overlap. See, I'm just doing that. You can also round them out so they're not so square if you have a square brush like me. But they're more oval shaped. They're not circles because you're not looking at it top down. You're looking at it from a little bit on the side. So you're not going to see, you're going to see more of like a disc kind of shape. Reminds me of pancakes. So just do that towards the bottom. And you don't need to go wild. Just do a few, some overlapped, and then just drag some to the side. These ones are going to be bigger because they're closer to you. And then just do some here, get a bit of a fill. As you get higher up on your canvas, which is pretty fast, you want to make it look like you have lots of depth perception. Everything's getting further and further away. You're not going to press as hard, or you're going to turn your brush on the side and make them a bit smaller. They like to clump together a lot, especially around the grass and reeds. So I'm going to do little ones back here. Almost like little dots, short little lines. You can barely see them, but you'll see them a bit more when we do the highlight and the shadow. The point is that you see most of them up closer to you, so the little ones that are subtle in the background, they're not as noticeable. You're just going to fill them in as you please. I'm just going to put some in the middle. I'm not trying to overcrowd or go nuts throughout the whole water. Put some on the side. You don't need to worry about too much on the side. It's going to be all grass here, but just to be safe, you can add some in. So up close, much bigger than the ones that are further away. And that's how it creates that foreground, middle ground to background. It's pretty nice. So I'm washing that off, and now I'm going to add a shadow. That's actually where I switch my brush to something smaller for the shadow. And you're going to take a little bit of water and just black. Taking my black, and you'll notice what I do, I just kind of cusp around the bottoms to create a bit of a shadow. I'm doing it pretty quick. I'm not trying to do like a full detailed thing around here, just bits of shadows. You can even wrap around a lily pad a little bit at the front. Not a full outline, not needing to do that. So I'm just gonna do little lines underneath some of these guys, just little dots. You don't have to even go right over top, you can just make new lines, but just adds a, again, a bit more shadow and adds to the look. And now for a highlight. The highlight is pretty much the same light yellow, the lime yellow, the yellow with the white. And try not to go crazy or too blobby with it. Just do little highlights along the tops. And don't have to do every single one, just some of them. Usually if something's over top of another, you just do that one. Sometimes I just make new ones with little dots. When I get back here, I just dot it on. I don't need to go over everyone. Just looks like there's a couple layers of them clumped together. So we have lots more lily pads standing out and not just that one color. Something that you can also add in is actually pretty much close to your watercolor. It's that shale gray blue. Blue and a touch of white and some black. You can tone down a lot of your lily pads if it's too much with this color, and it will make it look like they don't stand out as much, but it's also kind of preference. So you can see when I add this in, looks like you're muting a lot of it. Even though you're adding more on top, you're really taking away from everything you have. So you see these guys compared to here, these ones are more muted. So this is something you can add in, just adds to the style of the painting, especially here. You see it adds more dimension and reflection of the watercolors, not the watercolors, like just the watercolor in here, and it really mutes it. Big fan of doing stuff like this. It's not like your people are just staring at your lily pads now, so you have subtleness in your water for the lily pads, and it's not just bright green on top of blue. Now you have some of that blue toning it down. So if you need to go back and add anything in, maybe you want to put more highlight or more shadow with some of the black, you can. Sometimes this shadow is a good little touch into the water. I do actually add, once I do that, the shadow, I do add a little bit of a reflection in the water with some green. And I pull down the green with my flat, smaller square. You can take the green that you started with, so pretty much your darker green, wipe a lot of it off on your napkin and just pull it down. See, I'm just going right up to it. Maybe in between some of them, there's gaps because the ones back here would be reflecting too. Just pull some of it down. You don't have to go to every single one and just make a reflection for it. This is also optional. It's a very unique thing to do. Greens and make a lot more green noticeable in your water. So just be careful with, I guess, how much you do, how much you add. You can also just put in some lighter greens. Just pulling it down. See, I'm just wiping off a lot of that paint, pulling it down from the lily pads. It just fills in more green into your water. Okay, so I think this might be pretty good enough for me. And you can add some in if you want to pull it down more. Take a step back, look at your painting. It's always good to do to see if you need to add more. If you don't add as much, it kind of looks like it's very off and you've only done a little bit. But if you do them to a lot of the bunches, it all comes together, kind of makes sense, right? So I'm just going to wash off this brush. And before we finish off the water with some lotus flowers, I actually add white streaks into the water. Same medium brush. This is a great brush to use for this painting. Taking white, if you need to change your water, that's fine. I just use the same water. It doesn't matter. I don't need things like perfectly white. I just streak very lightly. Bits of white lines. It creates more of a highlight and reflection into the water. So you can even just tap with your brush right on the tip of it, go right in between. Don't go over your lily pads, but just go where it's lighter and break up some of that green to make it look like it's reflecting into the water now. So you can see this added step to make it more water-like. You can go some into your dark blue section.